Hi, this is Paul. It is Tuesday, Tuesday afternoon, late. Had a busy day. I've been trying to listen to Synod in the car as best I could. I've been trying to keep up with things. If you don't have time to watch and listen to everything at Synod, there is a live blog that they keep, and you can sort of scroll through. It's just sort of the decisions and what happened. It's very brief, and it's kind of an easy way to sort of follow along and keep up with it and see what's going on. The one of the big items that was addressed today was the Gravamina, and they had a fun little portion about how to pronounce it, which continues to be debated. But the I'll just summarize it. Prior to this synod, the understanding of taking an exception, and that was there was never the language of the church. There was a confessional difficulty gravamen, where the idea was that if you had a point of difference with the Heidelberg Catechism, the Canons of Dort, or the Belgian Confession, you could file this with your local council. It would be accepted. If it's accepted by them, it would be on file, and you could basically serve normally in the church and no one would know it. That was the old system, and the system has been updated. Now you can find one of the things that you can look for are the advisory committee reports. These advisory committee reports, there's a page on the Synod website called Synod 2024 Documents, and what is listed here are links to the advisory committee reports. Now, these advisory committee reports are what goes up on the screen when they're processing Synod. Again, all of everything from that fat book way down there goes into the advisory committees, and the advisory committees process everything that went to them, and they bring these advisory committee reports to the floor of Synod. And so often when you see a shot like, not like that, that's someone speaking from the floor. There's the vice president. Often when you see someone in the little box like this and the words over here, those are the advisory committee reports, and those are what are available. Now, you can go there, and it will show you the ones that have been completed, and they're sort of crossed out and completed. You can still read them, but you have to understand that if you do read them, that isn't necessarily what's happened. That's just what was proposed to the floor. And what finally comes out in the minutes is all of the decisions that were made on them. As I said before, there's this live blog, and the live blog will show you basically the decisions that have happened sort of in sequential form. Now, the big item that I talked about before Synod that was coming to Synod was the Committee 9 Gravamen report. And you can find that advisory report still on the page. It's 9A Gravamen, and it's a worthwhile read. There's the preamble, and all of this will go into the minutes of Synod. There's background, as Kent Hendricks noted, that these things are getting longer, and I feel for the secretary of the advisory committee, because the truth is, they start at 8 in the morning, and especially now, once the plenary sessions start, those reporters and the committee, they're meeting over lunch, they're meeting over dinner, they're meeting during breaks, and the poor reporter has to wordsmith all of this, usually with the chair and maybe another member of two. So Synod is a Synod is a gruel. It's a privilege and it's fun, but it is difficult. It takes a lot out of you. And you can see, I've just got it muted here, you can see that people are getting tired, and you can sense that. Plus, I've heard that the weather in Michigan has been muggy. People are, down here are the good people from my classes, having a wonderful conversation across the table. So it's a lot. And some people, it's late nights, and then you might not sleep that well because it's hot and humid, and they do give you a fan. That's good. And the beds are, if you're tall like me and big like me, the beds aren't that big. I guess they were, there's some of the dorms that are air conditioned, and so they were seeing if some people would share their room with other for the air conditioning. And after Synod, we'll hear more of these stories. But the advisory committee, the recommendations, okay, I began talking about the fact that the old way of doing gravamen was you would file a gravamen with your local church council. If that gravamen was accepted, a confessional difficulty gravamen, you basically had a pass. And over the last couple of years, there had been a lot of discussion that this was supposed to be a temporary situation. And what has happened is, if you look down, recommendations that Synod affirm the confessional difficulty gravamina are not meant nor should be used as exceptions to the confessions. So they made a few gaps here. One is, this isn't set to say, I disagree with this, I'm going to stay disagreed with this, but I can continue to work in the church as an office bearer. Now, quite clearly, this has arisen, and the intent is to stop sort of the spread and promotion for, let's say, same-sex marriage and within the denomination. That's pretty clearly what this has arisen out of. But of course, the application of this rule goes far more broadly, and that's been one of the questions and concerns that has arisen. The second point, that Synod amend the Church Order Supplement to clarify the definition and proper use of the confessional difficulty gravamen. Changes are indicated by underlined or strike through. A confessional difficulty gravamen, a temporary gravamen in which an office bearer, not a subscriber, because there's been a lot of conversation today about, well, you've got boards and you've got educational institutions. They're not office bearers, and this stuff was written for office bearers. And so a lot of this stuff in synods tends to get tackled. You sort of take some of this and it gets tried on. And if problems arise, then things come back to Synod through overtures and say, well, we tried this on, it didn't quite work for these reasons. And then if Synod decides to pick it up, then it comes back to Synod, and sort of there's usually a tweaking, recalibration that goes on with all of this. So an office bearer subsequent to their ordination develops and then expresses a personal difficulty with a point of doctrine teaching contained in these confessions, but does not have a settled conviction contrary to, nor call for a revision of the confessions. That's a different gravamen. So basically, the point was, well, you're in office and you started and things arise in the church and you say, maybe you didn't read the church's doctrinal statements that much. Maybe it's not something you paid a lot of attention to. A lot of people do just-in-time work with this kind of thing, and something comes up in church and the minister says, no, that's against our doctrine. And the office bearer's like, well, I never thought of this before. And then maybe they go back and they read the Heidelberg Catechism or the Belgian Confession or the Canons of Dort, and they say, oh, I don't agree with that. So this is for a case like that. And what it does is sort of put an up to 3-year time limit, and a lot of questions were, well, why 3 years? Well, because it's generally the term of office in the Christian Reformed Church generally. So it sort of covers the term of office, so they don't have to leave office if somewhere in the process something came up and they thought, hey, I disagree with the standing of the church. They basically can file this with a local church council, and they will serve out their term of office with permission of the local church council, but they won't be allowed in if that difficulty remains. Now, another difference is, in the past system, if, in fact, you filed one of these, you could operate at all subsequent levels of the church. You could operate at a classis, you could be delegated to synod, you can do all of that. Nobody would know anything about your gravamen because it was at the local church level. And so this was addressed with another thing. Okay, here it is. As part of this process, the office bearer shall recuse themselves from being delegated to broader assemblies while their confessional difficulty gravamen remains unresolved. So, in a sense, this puts the office bearer on a little bit of a pause and tries to enter into a process whereby the office bearer can be, let's say, restored to alignment. Now, there are a number of gaps in this that came up on the Synod floor, but Synod didn't deal with them. One of them is if, let's say, a council approaches someone and says, we'd like you to stand for deacon or elder. And that person then says, well, I would be willing to, but I have difficulty with these points. Someone tried to make an amendment that said that the local church would be able to allow them into office with the Gravamina, and then it would run that means that someone's difficulty wouldn't bar them from office. As I understand this at this point, the understanding is the language is that this is to be applied when someone is in office and by virtue of something happening while they're in office, they have a difficulty. So that obviously is going to have an impact on one of the real challenges for many churches, and has been for a while, of finding sufficient office bearers. Normally, in the Christian Reformed Church process, let's say your church needs 3 new elders. Ideally, you would establish a slate of 6 potential elder candidates from which the congregation would have 3. Over the last most of my life, it's often been the case that churches struggle to get more than the number of officers that they need to stand for office. So this, there's a fear that this will reduce the number of people that will be available to stand. Now remember, this arose because of the same-sex marriage debate, but the application of this is far more general. Now, how in fact this will work out in practice will be interesting to see. There is a huge variety in Christian Reformed churches. One delegate stood up and said, he was from Classis, Arizona, the further west you go, the less CRC you get. And there's a degree of truth to that, in that the Christian Reformed Church, especially sort of during the diaspora years and then the church planting years during the seeker movement, planted churches in a lot of places where there was no established Christian Reformed population. What has often happened in many of these churches is they would do evangelism and discipleship with people, and those people would sort of get, to a degree, reformed. But often churches like to pick up people who they're just looking for a church that's somewhere in alignment with them. And they're probably, maybe they went through the Heidelberg Catechism a little bit, but they probably don't know a lot of what's in there. And then when they begin their counsel, many of them probably, well, you should sign this covenant of office bearers. Well, what does it say? It says you're in alignment with the teaching of the church. And the person sort of sits there and thinks, okay. Yeah, I agree with what the pastor says, and I've been in Sunday school, and I agree with what the teaching of the church, and I've been in coffee break, and I've read the stuff that's come. The CRC seems A-okay, so thumbs up. What they may not have done is, let's say, a thorough search of the Heidelberg Catechism, the Belgian of Dort, and the Belgian Confession, and the Canons of Dort. And usually if they start in office, well, now suddenly not only do they have their familial obligations and their work obligations, now they have additional church obligations. And so I don't know that they're necessarily going to start reading through these things. Now, again, it might be that while they're in office, something might come up and they might go look and they might say, hey, that's what this addresses specifically. But these other cases doesn't do it much. Now, I think in the great scheme of things, this is a step towards better confessional. All of this is very much in an attempt to, let's say, block the advance of thinking about same-sex marriage in the denomination. If this is going to have any impact at all beyond that, the Christian Reformed Church is going to have to do a lot better job of catechesis and training deacons and elders. Now, one of the real highlights was a presentation given by Susan DeClear. Now, Susan is in charge of the candidacy committee in the denomination. She took this over a few years ago, and she's, by just about all accounts, she's been doing a terrific job. And as one person on Voices who read through the entire agenda said, one of the things that really stuck out in that in that agenda was the report from her, which of course is just nestled in there. I mean, she gives numbers, she gives practical attention, she is really on top of the situation. And all of this is about leadership development and leadership training. And so, you know, a lot of people are giving her really high marks for putting this together. Now, a friend of mine a friend of mine emailed me and said, "You're the reason that they've taken down comments on the live stream." I said, "Well, how was I the reason? I haven't left any comments on the live stream." But apparently it's a bunch of people who follow my channel that have gotten into the live stream and are treating it like, I don't know, like maybe the hive mind in one of our live streams or something. So anyway, that's shut down. So I was thinking about another video where, you know, part of what I think I'm at least partially responsible for is giving the Christian Reformed Church broader exposure to a far broader world. Now many more people know about the Christian Reformed Church and are interested in it and are sort of poking around in it. And local churches are sort of used to that, having church shoppers come in. And I know because of my videos that there are a number of people that are in Christian Reformed churches today that weren't 5 years ago, and that continues. But the Christian Reformed Church and internet culture, that's going to be a very interesting thing to see, especially now with sort of this new... Before COVID, you sort of had the sense that, let's say, the moderate left to the Christian Reformed Church was in charge, and there was a lot of anxiety about control, and that's got manifest in things like the Code of Conduct and Safe Church Team and all of those anxieties. Well, after COVID, all of the anxieties and the controlling is coming now from the right. And so early in the early in the process, there was a discussion about an overture that was held over from a previous synod that basically would have afforded other churches being able to appeal decisions of other council. And this was from CRC Synod. So if, for example, Living Stones, knowing, and some of you know this, that ducks eat bread, and some of you will get the inside joke about ducks eat bread. They do, they like it. Let's say the Council of Living Stones has decided that because ducks eat bread and they really like it, and they are part of God's creatures, that ducks should be welcome at the Lord's table because we serve bread at the Lord's table and ducks eat bread. So Living Stones decides that all ducks are welcome, and we put a flag out in front of the church with ducks on it, and we put on our website that we are open and inclusive to all manner of waterfowl because ducks eat bread and they like it. And let's say Lloyd Hemstreet's church way over in CRC Zeeland, there's that Paul Vanderklay making a mess on the internet. And what's going on at his church? They go to my website and they find our inclusion page, and we have a picture of a duck. So I shouldn't even do this because I know the people that probably got the live chat taken down are going to create memes about me and ducks and inclusion. But anyway, let's say the good council of Lloyd Hemstreet's church in CRC Zeeland says Vanderklay is out there teaching that ducks should be admitted to the Lord's Supper. And we've got to stop him. Now, right now, there's not a lot that CRC Zeeland can do because, well, they can, start a committee. Maybe they'll call it abiding or something like that, or maybe they'll call it Waterfowl Anonymous, and they could politic to try and get this. But basically, in order to appeal our council's decision of admitting ducks to the Lord's table, it would have to be a member of this church that would appeal the decision. And basically what would happen is that our council said, yeah, ducks are great. We open our door to ducks on Sunday morning, even though we've never had a single duck come through the door. But we're open and affirming of ducks, and they're welcome at the Lord's table because ducks eat bread. They do. They like it. I should probably play this video because otherwise this little thing isn't going to make any sense. All right, because this is the silliness that that reigns at times. Ducks eat bread.
They do. They like it.
And that has become sort of a meme in the corner. So that's where my duck illustration has come from. So anyway, someone from Living Stones, having been alarmed by this open embrace of waterfowl in the church, might say, "Hey, Living Stones, this is way out of line." And council says, "Come on, we love ducks." And then, they didn't get any satisfaction at Living Stones, and then they appealed to Classis. And then they would say, "Hey, you don't know what's going on over here at Living Stones. They're letting ducks, geese, all kinds of waterfowl in, and you know what, especially Canada geese. You know the mess they make." And then maybe Classis says, "Well, I don't know. Canada geese, they seem kind of important." And so maybe they don't get any satisfaction from Classis, and that person can appeal all the way up to Synod to try and get Living Stones to stop doing this. But that person comes from Living Stones, so they can appeal it all the way up to Synod. Lloyd Hemstreet, hearing about ducks eat bread, they like it, and what this council has done, they can't do a lot. They can sort of politic and raise a ruckus and do all of that, but there's no real way to sort of climb over. And that particular overture would basically establish a way that the church in Classis Zealand could get at the Living Stones Council and shut down this quackery that we have going on here. So, and that was early on, that was denied. And, this is, after you watch enough Synod, you sort of get a sense of it. And in terms of the ideas with respect to confessions, I mean, I don't know if I've ever heard a Synod talk about confessions more than this one, by far. And again, I hate to say I told you so, but a decade ago, I saw what was happening, and I thought, we're going to have one whale of a time with confessions coming up in the future. And then Belhar came up, and I thought, what are they going to do with this? And that was like nothing, but bang, this thing triggered it, and it's happening. But so that's that's part of what's going on in all of this. But now, okay, what about office bearers? What does this mean? Now, again, we'll have to see how this goes, because, well, they sort of want to tighten things up, but all of this machinery that they're using is machinery that often sort of, and this is part of the reason we haven't seen a lot of this for a long time, it's sort of sat idle and sort of rusted. And everybody would stand up at the beginning of Synod. We all agree with the confessions. And the RCA, that's what they were discussing just a few minutes ago. Well, they have the same ones as us, and there's some liberal churches out east, but most of the RCA churches are pretty evangelical, sort of like we're evangelical. So all of this machinery is now sort of oiled and greased and worked over, but how will it be used? Well, machines just sit there unless people use them. And so I think overall, while this has been a conservative Synod, there's also been some moderations. There have been a number of places in this Synod. One of the key places. So, I've played Rita's Cry, can my children still be Christian Reformed? Now, not only was there this question about Gravamina, which has been answered by this Synod, and they're trying this new 3-year program, and it's going to require a whole lot more formation and catechesis if actually any of this is going to really work. Then there's the other question of membership. And it was sort of ambiguous whether people who become members of the church sort of sign the covenant of office bearers without actually signing it. What level of subscription do we hold them to? And there's sort of two competing traditions. One that says, well, it's sort of a light, do you the formulary for joining the church is, do you agree with the doctrines of the church? And like I said, for people coming into office, they would think, yeah, I've listened to the preacher. He seems to be preaching out of the Bible and everything seems to be okay. This seems to be right. So sure, I agree. They haven't necessarily made an in-depth study of this. Others say, no, they're just like office bearers. But part of what we will see in time is how all of this stuff hits reality. Because people have vastly different capacities to, let's do theological reflection, even on the most winsome, accessible confessional document we have, which is the Heidelberg Catechism. So then the question arose, well, how does this really work for membership? And the answer was, it's up to the local council. And actually, I want to go to Paul Verhoef's speech, because he really told a lovely speech of a church in Canada.
And Laura.
Mr. Chair, this may be the first time I've said Paul Verhoef, Classis Alberta South and Saskatchewan. My apologies. I really have a probably more of a question, so if that's okay. But first, in Classis Alberta South and Saskatchewan, there is lots of churches, 17 or something. One of them is called Iron Springs Christian Reformed Church. It is this local rural church in the middle of all sorts of farm fields, and it is one of the most delightful churches to preach at. They're very positive and affirming. Sorry, used in particular cases. They also are the only church in Iron Springs. And so they asked, I've been in our classes for 20 years, and I think it was around 15 years ago when Folkert de Boer was a pastor of the church there, that they came to classes with the credential question, and they asked, what do we do? Because we're getting all sorts of people wanting to join as members our church, from the Catholic and the Baptist and whatever, because they're the only church in town. And I don't know that we as a classis ever did a really good job of working with their credential question, but it seems to me that it's somehow related to all of this. So I would love to understand what a church like Iron Springs does when it has all these people that want to join the church that really, if they're honest, aren't really Christian Reformed or confessionally. Are they supposed to not have some people be members, or is this local authority wide enough that they can say, just figure it out? Because that's what it felt like, and I just want to affirm that that's what we're saying so I can know which way to vote.
Yes, that's exactly correct.
Okay.
We want to give that council this ability, this feeling affirmed to do that.
Thanks, Anthony.
Laura?
And I thought that was super helpful. And again, this is where it's easy to sort of straw man something and say it's one-dimensional, but seldom are things quite this one-dimensional. And in the Christian Reformed Church, you sort of have 3 levels of authority. And the local council gets to decide. And then
delegate from Classis North Central Iowa. I'm not sure if I'm actually speaking in order to get a point of clarification, or if this is perhaps speaking against the motion, but the motion seems to be a redundancy. It states exactly what we ought to be following anyway, and I'm a little concerned that Article 27A emphasizes the original authority that the local council has, but 27B really emphasizes the importance of the delegated authority and how one assembly relates to another. And it seems to me that our church order has those two paired together in a beautiful kind of symmetry that we need to keep in balance. So I guess I'm not sure exactly how this recommendation forwards anything new, because we're already supposed to do 2, and it might actually obscure the A and the B dynamic that then needs to also be emphasized as we bring up other matters coming to the floor later in this week. Thank you.
Just one comment to that point. This recommendation too, it's more of an interim. It's more intended for the interim between now and whenever we receive back the response from recommendation 1. So that's how we wanted to address the overture, the authors of the overture and anyone else in a similar situation by basically, to your point about redundancy, reminding them of what they already have license to do.
Kevin, and then Joseph.
Wisconsin. I would like to call the question.
The question has been called. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Now I'm going to get to the speech of the chair of the advisory committee, because I thought he gave a really good speech.
I'll just read the recommendation 2 that councils have, under the principle of original authority, within their context and in submission to our creeds and confessions. So, to the extent that any issue is a part of what our creeds and confessions say, it applies to that.
Look, a lot of what's been said is why we did not this motion, but the first recommendation, right? We understand that there's a whole lot of need for clarification, because on the one hand, it's not on the picture anymore. 1975 says that members should be expected to conform to the confessions and agree with the confessions. On the other hand, we have what was just read over there from my brother, which seems to say something slightly different. We have this general sense that if someone in a situation wants to join our church and promises not to speak against it, that I think many of our churches have individuals who are members who don't agree with particular doctrines but understand that this is the doctrine of our church. We also have this thing called the covenant for office bearers, which seems to assume a different level of subscription. And yet, so what is that difference? We need advice about this. This is why we think it's so important. We got to figure this out. And so we thought the first step would be to have agencies and the seminary give us advice about this question. Because we didn't think that in our little advisory committee, in the little bit of time we had to deal with this, ought to be the one to put this together. So I can feel your confusion. I can assure you that this was exactly the same confusion and concern we had within our committee, and we need clarity on this. In the meantime, the best we can do, understanding, and this is Laura's A-B thing is right on. We're looking for A to be done, or sorry, is it B? I can't remember which is the higher, is it B that's the higher ones? It is B. The recommendation 1 is about, let's get the higher authorities to figure it out. In the meantime, local congregations and the previous things synods have said is all we've got to go on.
And I really hope they don't undermine the authority of the local church, because part of what happens, again, even in a synod like this, where, okay, we got all these new rules. None of these rules mean anything if, in fact, they're not loved and embraced and practiced and seen as useful. I mean, the way that church polity in the Christian Reformed Church works, it goes up and down and up and down. And, normally this will happen, and that's in the church order. And then things change. I think about the evening service. Now, I think, perhaps with this new address for confessionality, actually after I get back from my trip this summer, I am going to be doing some preaching in the Heidelberg Catechism, because I think we need it. And I have to do some videos about the Heidelberg Catechism, because because of the videos, I've got people coming into my church and they've got wildly different backgrounds. And now some of them will never be office bearers, let's say just because of age or some other reason. But they've been attending the church for months. A little church like this, one of the things you do in a little church, or really probably any size church, is that if someone starts attending, if they're just sitting, they're not a part of it. So you give them a job, you give them something to do. You somehow get them working in the church so that if a Sunday happens and they're not there, they know that there's a hole missed, that they're a member of the church. There's a whole lot more that we can say and talk about. And those of you who follow the 4 P's of knowing, I just was talking, so I had a cluster meeting today, which is where I meet with the other pastors in the CRC in my area. And this is a meeting that I prioritize because I really admire and appreciate and respect my colleagues in this area, because we're all struggling in this same milieu, and we're all trying to figure things out and bring the gospel and do all of that. And what's happening in one of the churches is that one of the guys has taken the meaning crisis language from Vervaeke and a bunch of his other things and sort of created a little course around it for his church, and talking about how the church addresses the meaning crisis. And he says people are loving it. People are, they might not be coming to church, but sort of like with Estuary, I've got people that are coming to this class every week in the middle of the week. They might not show up on Sunday, but they're coming to this class and they're learning about church and they're learning about Christianity. And so, at the local level, you need a degree of autonomy and authority to figure things out. And as things are figured out on the local level, they tend to drift up. And so things go, but if they get out of whack up, they come down. And so you actually, part of the genius of the Christian Reformed churches, it isn't just completely top down. Now, these last few synods may feel very top down, and actually there are seasons where things are more top down and seasons where things are more bottom up. But all of that is within tension, because you need tensions between all of these levels of the church and these levels of authority within the church. The local church, the regional church that tends to deal with again, more cultural issues, and then the binational church. And, part of, I really have to do another video on globalization, because globalization is impacting all levels of the church. And then the question is, okay, how can we learn from this? And as I said, Synod sometimes sort of staggers around like a drunk, like a drunken man. But it's important to not necessarily watch any specific synod, because even in terms of our polity, each synod is just a synod. There's this council of office bearers that does work between synods, but each individual synod is an individual synod. And so if you really want to see what is happening in the church, you watch the trajectory of synods. And so, in big picture, we've had a trajectory of synods sort of going one way. And then, like I've said, over the last decade and a half or so, I've seen the energy going out of it saying moving one way. And now there's a lot of energy pushing back. And so synod sort of goes back and forth. And people tend to panic. People tend to... Oh, that's just people. But if you sort of want to watch it, you kind of have to ride these things through. And I think in this synod, it's a very conservative synod. And if you look at some of the votes, but I don't like these labels of liberal and conservative or progressive and conservative, because they break down very quickly. And not everyone is sort of conservative about everything. They're conservative about this, but they're actually looking for a lot of change over here. And Synod sort of takes all of those pieces and puts it together. Oh, it's late. I got to get home. But yeah, I felt kind of bad about the last video I released. It was so messy, and of course a lot of followers on my channel are like, I like the messy videos. Why do you like the messy videos? Because you're just thinking out loud, and we can sort of hear your consciousness congress at work, all the little voices in your head. Now I know some of you, that sounds a little crazy, but when you listen to Synod, I have sort of voices of archetypes in the Christian Reformed Church in my head, and as I imagine into the future, I sort of see these types working with each other. And I think we all do this. And so some of the videos are more messy, but now, there's a little something to report. And there's still a lot on the really. So these things have been rules and procedures. I think everybody knew which way this thing was going. And I think actually it's not a bad thing that there was sort of an extra year for this sort of to cook and to come up with this. Now, I suspect this 3-year thing is going to get tinkered with because 3 sounds arbitrary. It's not exactly arbitrary. I actually, when thinking about this, envisioned something similar to what they did, but I didn't have sort of a time limit on it. I think it shouldn't be completely open-ended, but I think, again, the local church council should, in a case-by-case method, have priority. And now what we're seeing is a little bit more confessional concern expressed in how office bearers sort of get transmitted between assemblies. But you don't really want to interflow with that too much, too, because, again, the way that the Christian Reformed Church polity works, and I think it's really a tremendous polity, because you have all of these competing concerns that have to be dealt with. They have to be engaged. If they're not engaged at all of the various levels, the church is weaker for it and poorer for it. So you don't want to have all of these rules to control something, either from the right or the left, to sort of, make sure that things are happening down here. Number one, it doesn't really work. You get all of this, all of this hypocrisy and play acting. So you really need a living system that all of the levels are working back and forth, and they push against each other. And they don't always just push against each other officially, but they push against each other often in ways that, okay, so they just made a rule and nobody's following it. Well, why aren't they following it? Because the rule doesn't work, or they don't think it's a good rule, or something. Well, eventually what tends to happen is those rules tend to get overturned. And so in time, the church, a living church, continues to grow. And you do not want to interrupt the dynamics between the levels. And so, we'll see what the Office of General Secretary does with this recommendation. I would hope that, again, what comes back is something measured that says, I think I actually really like what this advisory committee said and did, because that is the process. And some people were shocked that local church can have that much latitude, and I think so. But again, latitude within limits, and what conflicts usually do. In a church, in a marriage, in a business, in a political frame, what conflicts usually do is sort of establish boundaries. And what the Christian Reformed Church has been wrestling with over these last 3 years, and quite a while before that, is in fact boundaries. And so, agree or disagree with the variety of decisions by the Christian Reformed Church, the process is working. And looking over, let's say, into the RCA, our polity is holding up. The organism is holding up. The RCA is a mess right now, and they've lost a lot of their larger, more vibrant, effective churches. They're left with a lot of smaller churches and struggling churches, and for the most part, I think the Christian Reformed Church is fortunate that it has the polity it has. And again, watching this, I think there is an effort on, now sort of conservatives have the rudder. And I can see efforts on their part of not trying to not overplay their hand. Now, in time, we will see what has been overplayed. But, at least we're not losing 50% of our churches and 65% of our membership. That is a catastrophe. And we've been seeing catastrophes in the mainline churches and now in the RCA. And this is a struggle, but it's not a near-term catastrophe. But I go all the way back. The foundations of evangelism and discipleship and church planting and confessional conversations and catechesis, if we're not doing all of these things better, because overall we're facing a tremendous demographic challenge. This, I'm not going to say it's disconnected from the demographic challenge, but just cinching up these rules won't address the demographic challenge. The basic ministry, the basic work of ministry still has to be done. And that's seldom done by applying rules or templates. It's done by learning to love one another with all of the complexity and demand that love requires. So I'll end this there. Unlike the Synod live streams, feel free to leave a comment below. And what happens is mostly it's most of you who watch all of my videos that leave the comments. But I do get some emails from Christian Reformed people who watch the videos. And yeah, we'll see where this goes.